Today, I would like to share with you something and someone who has been close to my heart for over 40 years. Those two things are jazz music and the incomparable Miss Sarah Vaughan. Hi, my name is Bill. I was lucky enough to see Miss Vaughan live at the Hampton Roads Jazz Festival in Hampton, Virginia in the summer of 1988, just a few months before she passed. And let me tell you, it was quite a concert. There have been many, many jazz vocalists through the years, from Holiday to Nancy Wilson, and they all have unique sounds and styles, and they all are terrific singers. But to me, there is only one jazz vocalist who deserves the title Jazz Diva, and that is Ms. Sassy Sarah Vaughan. Now, I will try to explain my reasons for that to you and hopefully get you to agree with me by discussing a little bit of her history, the vocal tone that she has, the vocal range that she has, the musicality of her voice, and the longevity of her incredible career. And it was indeed an incredible career. Miss Vaughn was born on March 27, 1924, in Newark, New Jersey. Her parents had migrated to the state of New Jersey from Virginia. She grew up with music all around her. Her dad was a carpenter by trade, but played piano and the guitar. And her mother, who worked as a laundress, sang in the church choir. Sarah began her piano lessons at the age of 7 and also sang in the church choir and later played for the rehearsals for the church choir. She went to school in Newark, New Jersey and lived, other than when she was an adult, in the city of Newark, New Jersey. She dropped out of school when she was 17 years old to pursue a career in music, and we are so glad that she did. About a year after she dropped out of high school, Miss Vaughn and her best friend went on an outing to New York City one night, and her best friend convinced her to sing at the amateur contest at the famous Apollo Theater in New York City. This was the beginning of her steps as a jazz diva. She sang the song Body and Soul. She won the contest. The purse for the contest, or the winnings, was a $10 bill and a week's worth of performances at the Apollo, which was an amazing thing and a great opportunity for Miss Vaughn at that time, and really was the beginning of her walk on the path to jazz diva. As you see in the picture here, Miss Vaughn is backstage at the Apollo Theater with Billy Eckstine and Duke Ellington. The Apollo Theater at the time was a hotbed for entertainers. Band leaders, club owners would come to the Apollo to listen for new talents to hire for their venues. Billy Eckstine was there during her week of performances. He heard her, was very impressed, and he went to Earl Hines to convince him to hire her as his girl singer for his band. Earl Father Hines was a very famous jazz band leader in that time frame. He hired Miss Vaughn as his girl singer, and she began to develop her very unique style by singing with his band. Now that we have gotten to a certain point in Miss Vaughn's history, it's most important for you to now hear about her vocal range, her vocal tone, the musicality of her voice, and the longevity of her career. At this point, she was singing with Earl Father Hines and playing second piano for his band. This is where she really began to develop her very unique style. Miss Vaughn had a vocal range of 4 octaves, when most of the contemporaries of hers had a 2 or maybe a 2.5 octave range. And her vocal tone was amazing. It She could go from a warm, burnished contralto to the very clear high C of a soprano, and often did in the same phrase. She often took the line of the horn in musical arrangements because you could actually hear her voice floating above the music. It was such a gorgeous tone to it. And the musicality of a voice, again, she could go from a low, low tone and build it up and swirl it all around and bring it back to a really high tone, often in the very same musical phrase. So she was amazing to hear. It was at this point that she was compared to the opera singer Leontine Price. It was said that with the proper training, she could compete with Leontine Price in operatic musicals. So she had quite a range and quite a tone. She also had a great career. But the most important thing that happened, which happened to her right after she left Earl Hindspant, she sang with him for about a year and a half. And then the famous Carnegie Hall concert came. Miss Vaughn followed the famous Lester Young on stage, where she sang a song and went from the burnished contralto C that I was telling you about all the way up to the clear, cool A of a soprano in the same opening phrase of the song that she sang. Here was when she became known as the Divine One because of her voice. Also, it was said that she was the most talked about voice in America during this period. But the most important thing that came from that concert, other than fame, was that Leonard Feather, who was the jazz producer for Mercury Records, a very big label at the time, went to Miss Vaughn and convinced her to sign with Mercury Records jazz label, which she did. She enjoyed a very, very long career with Mercury Records, where she was actually nominated for 9 Grammy Awards and won 2. That's nothing to sneeze at, let me tell you. This was truly the beginning of her steps toward the Jazz Diva label. In the mid to late 1950s, two things occurred to push Miss Vaughn along in her way to jazz divadom. One was the invention of hi-fi. Now, kids of today don't really know what hi-fi was, but hi-fi was the beginnings of the stereophonic sounds that we listen to today. Before hi-fi was invented, all recordings were done on a mono theme, and that was it. Just one speaker, one voice. After hi-fi, with their woofers and tweeters, voices could be heard through one speaker, music could be heard through another speaker, and the mix together was just amazing. And Miss Vaughn's vocal range, her vocal tone, the musicality of her voice, the whole package made her the queen of the hi-fi lovers. The other thing that happened along in the late 1950s is Miss Vaughn had a recording of a song called Broken Hearted Melody. Now, Broken Hearted Melody was something very, very different from what Miss Vaughn was used to singing. Broken Hearted Melody was a rock and roll song, but it was on the top 10 Billboard magazine chart. So that was just proof to anyone that Miss Vaughn could sing anything in any genre of music and become a success. It was also that this time in uh, her career that Europe called. Europe was calling for everyone in the jazz world to come out and perform through the European cities. Anyone from Louis Armstrong, Billie Holiday, to Jack Teagarden, they all wanted to be heard by Europeans, and Miss Vaughn was no exception. Miss Vaughn started her tour in Paris and went all through Europe. And the picture that you see above me is one taken in one of her later tours from 1964. And I believe this was taken in Sweden when she toured the country of Sweden. If you want to listen to the song, she is on YouTube with this particular uh, tour of Sweden. You just have to type in Sarah Vaughan Sweden tour and it will come up and you can hear this amazing voice. She was something else, and she became, of course, the darling of European society, just as she had become the queen of hi-fi and the most talked about voice in America. This is the Sarah Vaughan that I saw at the Hampton Cool Jazz Festival in the summer of 1988. Let me tell you, this woman was a consummate performer. She had the whole of the Hampton Roads Coliseum in the palm of her hand within 2 minutes of entering the stage. And I'll tell you how she did it. She came out, it was summer in Hampton, you know, it's hot. So she came out with a white handkerchief in her hand. She was wearing an orange colored muumuu type dress, flowy chiffon, and she was wiping her brow. And she got up, walked to the piano, sat down on the bench, adjusted her microphone, and she looked at the very top back of the Coliseum and spoke up into her microphone and asked the lighting guy to kill the spotlight because it was too blasted hot. I mean, everybody at that point just laughed, and she had them. She had us all. We were enthralled with this woman. She became not the legendary Sarah Vaughan. She became our friend Sarah Vaughan in just a few sentences. And then, of course, she went into singing her songs, and even though at that point she had been singing for over 40 years, the voice was still true, still clear as a bell. And I, for one, was enthralled, and so was everybody else in the audience that day. Now, in conclusion, I have already spoken to you about her history, how she became the jazz diva I think she is. I've already spoken to you about her vocal range, her vocal tone, the wonderful musicality of her voice, and the length of her career, which was a lengthy one. This woman recorded 48 albums, 35 compilation albums, 10 live albums, and 5 box sets of music through her career. Now, she was nominated for 9 Grammy Awards and won 2. I mean, what more can anyone ask for in a career, let me tell you. Now, if that doesn't convince you, that and all the things I spoke about in this speech doesn't convince you, I know that there's one thing that will. If you go, after listening to my speech, if you go to your favorite streaming device and you click on it and listen to Sarah Vaughan's version of Tenderly or Misty or Broken Hearted Melody, that will certainly help you to decide that she is indeed the jazz diva. I thank you so much for your time, and I know that you will agree with me. She is the true jazz diva of all time. Here are the resources that I used to get information to share with you about my favorite jazz diva, Miss Sarah Vaughan. They are Dias Risas Zachariah for 2009, The Divine One. Sarah Vaughan gets Hometime Honor in New Jersey, New York, Amsterdam News. Gorse Leslie, 1994. Sassy, The Life of Sarah Vaughan, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Da Capo Press. Larkin, Colin, 2009, The Encyclopedia of Popular Music from the Oxford University Press. And Owen Imani, 2018, The Most Talked About Voice in America from the Woman's Book Review. Again, I thank you very much for your time. Hope you enjoyed this speech. Hope you go ahead and listen to Miss Sarah Vaughn, because if you do, you're going to agree with me, I guarantee it. Thank you so much. Have a good day.